Views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the participants. The hosts make no claim to be literary experts, and their opinions are exactly that, opinions. All creative works discussed or reviewed are the intellectual property of the creators of said stories and is being used under the fair use doctrine.
Trigger warning. This episode touches on adult topics and briefly mentions rape in the context of the story. Listener discretion advised.
Swords and Soulmates, a podcast where we discuss romantasy stories. I am one of your hosts, Mari, and with me I have Kelly.
Hey everyone, it's Kelly. And also joining us we have Ashley.
Hello everybody, this is Ashley. And we also have Jonathan.
Hey, bringing up the rear. It's me, JP.
Today we're going to be going over a book we read. But before we get into that, I thought we would talk a little bit about some of the news, romantasy stuff that is coming up. It's not everything. It's not all exhaustive, but some stuff that I thought we might be interested in talking about and that I thought you guys might be interested in hearing about.
And of course, this is at the time of recording. So by the time you listen to this, it may be old news.
It probably will be old news, but I tried to do stuff that's a ways out. I didn't do anything that very, very soon for the most part. First thing I had up on the news was that Carissa Broadbent, the author of Crowns of Nyaxia, released that her third installment is going to be coming out November of this year, November 19th, 2024. And it's going to be called The Songbird and the Heart of Stone.
Did you read the first two?
Yes. And I think Ash did as well.
Yeah, we devoured that one pretty quickly,
so good.
I think. I don't know if we're saying branding names. I was going to say that it is on Kindle Unlimited. I mean, you can buy them.
Your money spends better than mine.
This is also true. And I might want the book trophies because I think their covers are really pretty.
Very pretty.
But very excited for book 3. The first two were pretty good. Were really great, actually, especially after coming off of the Rebecca Yarros high.
Yeah, I honestly wasn't expecting a whole lot because I love vampire stories. And so I've read a lot of vampire stories and I was like, oh, it's another vampire story, whatever. And then it was kind of described, and it kind of is. The first one starts off, it's a little bit Hunger Games-y in that there is a contest, there is a game kind of thing. But the world feels very much like Castlevania type vampires. Like you have lords and you have this feudal kind of system and you have different kinds of vampires and you have like vampire gods that are involved. It's a fun and unique vampire world. So definitely don't sleep on it.
Different lore.
Mm-hmm. And the novellas in the world are really good.
My only exposure to Castlevania is Nintendo. Just the first one.
Well, there's quite a world of Castlevania now. There's, in addition to all the games from Nintendo to PlayStation and so forth, there's also several animated series
on Netflix,
that are on Netflix.
Yeah. Ooh.
And some of them quite in the rated R section for gratuitous violence.
Yeah. I mean, it's vampires. So one of my favorite games of all time is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I was, I think, in early college playing that, and I loved that game so much. And that's the vibe of this book to me, the world of that book. That's going to be one I'm looking forward to. The other one I had on here, and I am going to pre-apologize because I do not speak Chinese, and I know that this author is of Chinese descent. I believe her name is Xiran Jay Zhao. She wrote Iron Widow. I very much loved. It's a fantasy retelling of the only female emperor in Chinese history, and it's told using like mecha robots. It's a really weird, very cool book. The sequel was supposed to come out earlier this year, and she had some issues with it. It got pushed back. And so now it's coming out on Christmas Eve, December 24th of this year. Very good. Another very good book, very good author. I would recommend. It's a very unusual story. I never would have thought I would be interested in like a mecha robot story, but she fleshes it out really, really well.
What's mecha? What's mecha robot? Is it just like a robot?
Like a giant robot with a pilot in it. So I think my first exposure to mecha robots was Neon Genesis anime, but it's a whole genre. Yeah, it's a whole genre. like big, giant, almost like Godzilla-sized robots, but they're piloted by a human pilot.
Yeah, the mecha thing is stuff like Voltron, the early Robotech series in the 80s. Giant mecha robots piloted by humans. And of course, eventually all these giant mechas fighting each other or fighting an equally sized large monster.
That's pretty rad.
Yeah.
So I went to immediately add to TBR because when Mari makes a recommendation, I usually take those seriously. And the first sentence describes it as Pacific Rim meets The Handmaid's Tale. So I do have to ask, how Handmaid's Tale are we talking? Because I feel like that is going to deter
Okay.
some.
So I've not watched The Handmaid's Tale TV show, but I did have several times read The Handmaid's Tale book. It was a pivotal book
You're great.
early on. So I would say the way that I think it falls into The Handmaid's Tale is in that it's a world that's very misogynistic. It's very feminine. Women are things to be used up in this world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it also says YA, so I'm assuming the triggers are probably less.
Yes,
when
it's
you're talking
not
about it.
as...
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not going to say it's not as gut-wrenching. I'd say that the Handmaid's Tale comparison parts aren't quite as gut-wrenching, maybe, as Handmaid's Tale in this book. Not to say that there aren't there's some very emotional parts. And this is not spoiling anything. This is like, I think, the very first chapter. The main character's whole reason for what she does throughout the book is the death of her sister. Like the death of her beloved sister. So like there's definitely emotional resonance that pulls you through that is based off of tragedy. But the story as a whole, I don't feel is steeped in tragedy.
Yeah. I'm sending Jonathan the description because there's just some wild combinations of words that I wouldn't think to ever mash up before. So like concubine pilot is interesting to me.
Next news bit is Legends and Lattes, which I know Kelly read and I read. Have you guys read Legends and Lattes?
I have not.
I tried.
Okay.
I tried. Listen, it was great. It was good. I couldn't finish it. It was very slow for me. And it was an audiobook in its own defense. I was listening to the audiobook and it wasn't uninteresting, but for me, I think if it were a movie, I would have been like entranced. But for whatever reason, this audiobook was not doing it for me. And I wanted to love it because I know you have been raving about it for at least a year, if not longer. Maybe I should have doubled the speed. Jonathan likes to listen to audiobooks and he's always listening to it at double the speed. Maybe double the speed would have helped me. I definitely got like halfway, almost 3/4 of the way through. And it was just like, I'd had it. Libby took it back. I didn't finish it.
Yeah.
I want to love it. It was just not moving for me.
It's not for everyone.
I think it has amazing potential for like series adaptation or...
Well, the author, Travis Baldree, said like the story... How he came up with it, how he decided to write it was basically, it was a NaNoWriMo, the November writing, whatever that November novel challenging writing thing is. It was a thing that Travis Baldree did with a friend, and the challenge was to come up with a Hallmark movie set in a, fantasy D&D-esque kind of world. And once I heard that, I was like, oh, now I want to read it. Looking at it from that viewpoint, that's kind of what I was expecting out of it. But it is very slow plot-wise.
There was definitely a lot of building. And I appreciated the characters, like, individually and, the banter and the jokes and the personalities. Like, they did a fantastic job building up this story. It was just taking too long for me. I didn't finish it before I lost the audiobook.
Tor is releasing it on hardcovers. It's coming in October of this year to hardcovers because it was released just in paperback. The hardcovers look pretty cool. They've got like printing on the side. It's Legends and Lattes and Bookshops and Bone Dust, the prequel. So it's going to be, both of those are going to be released in October. I'm going to skip to the last news thing we have, and then I'll go back to the Fourth Wing, because I think we're going to talk more about Fourth Wing. So the last news thing I had was FairyLoot is doing a special edition of the Throne of Glass series, of some of the Throne of Glass series. Whether or not anyone's actually going to be able to get to that, if you're not a FairyLoot subscriber, is up in the air. Apparently they're going to open it up to FairyLoot UK subscribers, and then FairyLoot US subscribers, and then UK public, and then last on the list, on April 18th, if there's any left, is going to be the US public for Throne of
Silly
Glass.
US. Yeah, that's gonna sell out.
That's
super fast.
yeah, 100%. I thought it was really pretty. I know there's been some pushback on that the art is too generic. I thought it was pretty. I'm fine with that. I'm not going to sit there and stare at the cover of the pages of the book. If I'm buying a special edition, I just kind of want it to look pretty on my shelf.
So when you say that some criticism has been that the art is too generic, was there an actual artist, or is this AI generated art that they're using for the cover?
No, there is an actual artist.
Yeah, so it says exclusive redesigned covers. I think the name is Michaela Alcano Design, and forgive me if I'm butchering that. I just looked it up really quickly. Reversible dust jackets, character art by Morgana Anagram, foil in the hardcover by the same Michaela Alcano Design, character artwork on the end papers, foiled character artwork by Morgana Anagram again. So it looks like it's those two designers.
Yeah. I know they're actual people, and I know the pushback is some people were like criticizing the artists for it to the point where FairyLoot had to come out and say, like, be nice. I think the artists did what they were commissioned to do. So I think the issue might be, you as an artist, you do what you're commissioned to do. You don't get to choose what you're going to draw.
Is this series complete? Like,
yes.
Is Sarah J. Maas? Okay.
Yeah, Throne of Glass is complete.
Okay. So I was going to say, like, because I know, like, the ACOTAR series isn't complete. Right. So maybe the artwork was a little bit more, like, quote-unquote generic, because she hasn't expanded yet.
Yeah, and
but, I mean, looking at it, it looks really nice. I think what's interesting is that while the cover art itself maybe is more generic, the sprayed edges depict, like, an actual scene.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a scene in the story. I haven't read Throne of Glass yet. That's an investment that my bank account has not made yet. But I think I like the fact that they're special edition covers and then like special edition sprayed edges that actually reflect like a picture, like a painting.
Yeah, I think it's really pretty. I read Throne of Glass. I committed to it without realizing exactly how many books there were. It pulled me in, especially those last few are so long. It's a very good series. Like, it's a very involved multi-character point of view, multiple things going on at the same time, multiple worlds and cultures coming together. I think it's a very, very good fantasy. And then the last bit of news, Rebecca Yarros went on Good Morning America and let everybody know the name of her next Fourth Wing book, the third book, and when it's going to be released. So it's going to be called Onyx Storm, and it's going to be released January 21st. Thoughts?
Any theories? like I'm thinking...
There were so many spoilers in that sentence.
I know.
I feel it's necessary to.
Yeah, we're going to have to cut that out.
Entirely.
It's been out for a year. I mean, like, what's the rule?
It has not.
I don't know. I think leap over Jonathan talking so we can all laugh about it.
I think that's far better content. Leave some suspense. Absolutely.
I will say that every one of Rebecca Yarros's Empyrean books or whatever books in this series end with a huge reveal and a plot twist and a bum 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 at the end. So I don't know what's coming in this one.
That bothers me. I don't think every book needs to end on a cliffhanger. And Rebecca, if you're listening, it would just be really nice if you gave us one that just like didn't rip our hearts out with the last page.
She's going to. She's announced that.
Well, but
that book number 5.
Like it's just not necessary for every single book. Like some cliffhangers, yes. No, but I think they've alluded to some stuff. So when they said the word onyx, that made sense. I'm not sure if anyone on this show noticed, but last week there was an awareness that came to the book talkers that Rebecca Yarros and a lot of her team flipped their profile pictures into black and white photos.
I heard about that.
It was very much like Taylor Swift esque because that's some Easter egg stuff that Taylor will bust out to keep people on their toes. So it not seem like a coincidence that a dozen or so folks had changed their profile pictures suddenly to black and white pretty quickly. I think I read one comment somewhere that said this probably has to do with the venom because the venom drain, right? They take. And so someone was like, yeah, we're going to see a lot more venom in book 3 and maybe like dive into that explanation into that world.
Yeah. So the three of us have read it.
Exciting.
Kelly, you are out, right?
Yeah, I'm like, I don't even know which part of this needs to be edited for spoilers.
I didn't know you didn't read it. Kelly, you should read it. You're going to, if I were you, I mean, try to align yourself when you go into it. Just love Dane. He's such a kind-hearted soul.
If the years have taught me anything, Jonathan, it's that I should do exactly the opposite of what you say.
All right. But what we are gathered for today is our review of Shadows of Kiev by Eliza Tilton. We all read this book and we decided that we were going to do a little review, a little overview, little ratings and talk about it. I will say kind of why we picked this book or how we picked this book is we're all going to be going to the Romantasy BookCon event that's going to be happening in Orlando in October of this year. And so we basically got their list of Romantasy authors and randomly picked a number. And this is what we ended up on. And then we, chose one of her books that were fantasy, romantasy based because she had a few genres that she writes in. But yes, Shadows of Kiev by Eliza Tilton, which was released in September of 2018. So not new. So it's been out there for a little bit. I am going to read the synopsis from Amazon because I am bad at summarizing stories. The Northmen are coming and they seek vengeance. After accompanying his father to a Slavic settlement to investigate strange tales of the undead, Viking Folkvar discovers that not only do the dead walk, but the whole forest seems to want his kind dead. When his father is kidnapped by the magical Rusalka maidens, there's only one person who can help, and Vikings and Slavs just don't mix. Ever since her parents were slaughtered by Vikings, Agna has feared and hated the Northmen. When a Valdak attacks her in the woods, she realizes the dead are much more terrifying than Vikings. Putting aside the hate and distrust, she decides to help the young Viking and stop the madness invading her home. With generations of dislike running through their veins, Folkvar and Agna must embrace their growing desire and work together in order to save both their people from the rising dead. But sometimes love isn't enough, and it can't stop what's about to come. And then what I thought was interesting is at the end of the little Amazon blurb, it said, sink your teeth into this YA dark fantasy filled with Vikings, romance, fantasy, and monsters in 9th century Kiev. Fans of Leah Bardugo's Grisha trilogy will fall in love with Shadows of Kiev. And it was different because when I went to the author's website, in her little synopsis, what she had on it was Romeo and Juliet meets The Walking Dead in 9th century Kiev. So I thought it was interesting what each of them decided to highlight.
Yeah, I think those are two very different ways of marketing the book.
Very, very. Did you get Romeo and Juliet vibes?
100%, yes.
Yeah. So,
really?
Yeah.
So in our general overview here, this will be a spoiler-free discussion while we talk about it. And then for you listeners out there that don't want spoilers, we will warn you once we begin discussion that includes spoilers.
Oh, I got to go on mute.
I'm sure you can be controlled. So for the non-spoilery parts, I figured we can just give our overall stars of what we thought about like the story, plot, character development, just like general rating of the book. And then we would get into the spoilery stuff once we go a little deeper into it. I gave it overall 3 stars. And for me, that was mainly the plot and the elements that were pulled into the book that put it up there. What do you guys think?
I mean, on Goodreads, I gave it 3 stars because they don't let you give fractional stars. But I would totally, if we're just talking story plot, 2.125. That's where I'm at.
Very specific.
Precise.
I did some magic math.
Okay.
Creative accounting.
What about you, Ash? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this one for me was a solid 2.5, 'cause I'm about the halvesies. It was a good story. It was fast paced. You could, jump on a flight from here to Colorado and knock it out.
Yeah.
So I appreciated it kept the pace that it started with, right? Not all books kind of flow.
What made
the
you
same,
choose Colorado?
because that's the only big flight I've ever taken.
Okay, I was like, how are you measuring that? What are you just like, Florida to Colorado? That's a book. That's the one.
We use
Actually,
arbitrary
never really flew.
arbitrary units of measurement here on the show.
That was my creative accounting, guys. That was all I had. I figured, no, seriously, if I were to sit down and dedicate time to it, I could have knocked that out in less than 3 hours, like with no distraction, easily. And so for me, it's a quick fix. I would get a story, fairly entertaining because zombies, right? Undead. There was gore. There was far more gore than I thought there would be.
You're a word skipper. You got to put it into like regulation speed.
Don't tell me how to read, sir.
No, I mean, but like if you're gonna if you're like telling people like, hey man, it's gonna be like a 3-hour book, but that's like you're a word skipper, so like that's where you're like that's how you're getting.
Not all words are necessary.
I agree.
Well, I mean, okay, so the book's only like 200 pages, 211 pages. It's not a very long book. It definitely is a book you can read in not very long. Yeah, I agree with Ash.
Yeah, and like that was enjoyable for me, right? There wasn't an overwhelming amount of time or energy that needed to dive into. So 2.5, I was entertained. It was a good story. It could be, it's one and done. I'm not sure. Is there a sequel? It felt like
it's a standalone. I believe
it's a standalone, but it sure felt like there was a potential to try and set up a sequel.
Right. Kelly, what was your rating? You said 3?
Yeah, I had to go with everyone else here pretty much. I felt it was a 3. Again, I agree with you. Actually, it was a pretty short read. I didn't really time myself, but I know I read it in only a couple of evenings reading it here and there. It made some interesting story points, but I think it just really failed to deliver on any new plot. It really didn't avoid any cliches either. So, yeah, it's kind of one of those books that it was like, it's an easy read. You pretty much are going to get what you expect. Everything is pretty straightforward.
I agree with that. Like going back to Jonathan's like word skipping thing, I found myself skipping over or reading very quickly over the very, very long action detailed sequences where it was like the fights were super detailed, like it was fight choreography set up for like an action movie. And what's interesting is I went back and read a little bit of what the author had talked about how she writes. Her husband wrote the action parts and she wrote the rest of the book. And it felt like 2 different writing styles to me. I'm not interested in fighting choreography. Like I'm interested in watching it. It's cool to see. I'm not interested in reading it. So I did find myself very much glossing over the parts that were very much about like, oh, the blade went this way and then the knee went this way and then like I punched it or whatever. Not that part didn't pull me in. I will say what I was very impressed with this author was how many different elements, and I'm not going to go into them because that'll be later in the spoilery part, but how many different elements of fantasy she was able to pull in to one story and make it mesh together was pretty well done. What I did not like was character development wasn't there for me. I didn't feel like the actions matched what we knew about the characters, and I didn't feel like they changed a whole lot from the beginning of the book to the end. And also I wasn't very invested in their story because to me it did a good job of being a Romeo and Juliet story. And I'm not a fan of a Romeo and Juliet story, so it was definitely truth in advertising to me. It's just not my jam.
What we're coming to here is if we average all of our scores together, we get a 2.65. And that includes Jonathan's arbitrary 2 and 2.12.
There's definitely some math that goes into that.
I'm sure there's a very complicated formula for that.
Is that new math or is that ye old math?
So 2.65, I guess we feel like we would say if we're doing halvesies, then we've got to round that up to a 3.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I'm not opposed.
Because you can't do halves on Goodreads, right? So
correct.
So there you go. Okay. Probably overall average of 3.
Yeah.
So now that we've done the spoiler-free section, dear listeners, if you do not want to hear spoilers, then you need to just go ahead and skip all the way to the end, or just stop the playback right now and come back and listen to it once you've read the book. Mari will open up talking about spoiler-filled reviews.
Yeah. Okay, so my thing, as far as the spoiler felt, that I was so super impressed with this author, is it felt like she put all these fantasy elements in a bag. It was like, oh, zombies and Vikings and maybe vampires and fae and witches. And you know what? For shits and giggles, let's put Baba Yaga in there. Why not? Why not Baba Yaga? Always Baba Yaga. And she just like pulled it all out and was like, mush, but made it work. Like somehow this worked. Oh, and Norse mythology, which I guess goes with the Vikings, but like all of it, and just made it work. So I was very impressed with that. I was like, how?
So it's interesting. It's interesting that your focus was on the fantasy, because for me, my focus was the faith and the female characters' more rural faith, right? The spirits of the forest and the generational yayas that know all and see all and you know, just inherently can tell things.
Like folk magic.
Whereas, you know, folk magic, that's the terminology I was looking for, I was digging for. But then you go, like you said, into the Norse mythology, which was very much a faith for them, right? For a Viking. And they believed in Odin the way that Christian believed in God. I thought it was very impressive how she took the folk magic, the Norse belief, as well as what presented as Christianity, and brought them all together in a cohesive, what I felt was fairly cohesive, without really, there was mistrust, right? You could tell that there was some concerns about honesty, but they all, you know, they came together. Oh, well, this bad thing's happening. Let's Power Rangers unite. And
oh man, so I attached to the same things that Mari attached to, but for the opposite reason. So like I literally, my notes said like it would smash magic. She just took bits and pieces of everything. Like Catholic dogma, and then we're gonna get some like a fairy, and we're gonna get like this zombie and
Will o' the Wisps.
I'm sitting there and reading. I'm like, John Wick is in this book. I don't get it. Like there's just too much going on. It's a smorgasbord. Tone it down, lady. Just
but it worked.
Choose one. No, stay in your lane. Choose one. Be Norse. Be a witch. That's cool. You can make a whole book about witches and wizards. That's a thing. You can put them in different places. She put them underwater.
Yeah, that's true. There was underwater stuff too.
Did you see scuba snails coming? I didn't see scuba snails.
No,
that caught me. That was like
it was not on my bingo card.
To the ear hole.
I think the smashing of all this stuff together. I agree with both Jonathan and Mari and Ashley. It felt like she was just taking a shotgun approach to try and stick as many different elements in there. And it almost felt like search engine optimization. Let me make sure I include every bit of different fantasy elements so I can get all the hits.
It was an equal opportunity fantasy.
Right.
No,
so
you could be mildly racist with your magic and just choose one.
Well, the problem I felt about it was I find it very difficult that all of those the diaspora of all those elements all came together against a common foe. It just seemed a little bit far-fetched. I did like that there was some inclusion of the old religion, because and it's not like that's anything new. We've seen the old gods versus the new gods type conflict before, even as recent the Game of Thrones books and TV show, where you had the old gods and the new gods type conflict, and many other TV series, fantasy books, etc. Where you have the old isolated witch or medicine person who lives off away from the village that knows everything and is somehow in touch with nature greater than anyone else. These are all tropes we've seen before or read before. So I don't feel like there was anything new that was done with that. I mean, I was convinced from the start that Yaya was going to be Baba Yaga, because of the name, I was just like, oh, she's going to Yaya, who lives in a hut away from the village. Oh, it's obviously Baba Yaga. I felt that was what was coming.
I would have been really excited by that, because I love Baba Yaga. I love Baba Yaga so much. But also, I love mashups. So I loved all this stuff coming together, because to me, a mashup is just chef's kiss.
It's a different source of entertainment. Like I was entertained for those reasons, but Jonathan and Kelly were not.
Yeah.
It's just it was a little too much to try to like, figure out.
I think it was
like,
too
whose
much
side-
in
whose side
such
you wanna
a
root for.
short book. That was one of the issues I
Yes.
had. It was such a short book. There was no, felt like for some part of it, you know, like they went to go collect the priest and he came back to help them, you know, just that easy. It felt like there was a lot more exposition that should have been done, but it's just like, oh, we got the priest now. Oh, we got this. We got the party together.
Okay.
We got all these different elements together.
Did you notice that when they got the priest was like, hold on, all my brothers are out of town right now. Let me just leave them a note, right? So he got this
Very
note,
stuff.
wrote it down, stuck it on the
Agreed.
refrigerator. None of his brothers came.
Yeah.
Where's the love? They're just like, they got home and they were like Caspians out saving the world from like John Wick and whatever. And then he's just like, we don't need it. He's got it. He's good. He's never used magic in real time, just only in theory. He's only like hypothesized. He's good.
Yeah, and thank goodness that not only was he able to do it, he was also apparently very able to do it.
That's the cleric mindset though, right? It's all faith-based. To me, it was a D&D party. You had the cleric and it's all about faith. It's not about like how much experience you have. It's how much faith he has in his god. So you had him, you had the magic witchy enchantress, I guess, in Yaya and in Agna in a way. You had like the brute force folkvar. Yeah, it felt like a D&D party coming together. You have D&D parties where like your different characters have different gods and different ways of getting their powers or their strengths. And then they go get together and fight the big bad, fight the undead.
Yeah. May the force be with you.
Kelly's a much more
he did the
experienced D&D
salt
player
spell.
than I am.
And the thing, too, I had about this book is anytime you start to bring Vikings and some kind of undead monster like the undead zombies, vampires, etc., you're running smack into the Michael Crichton book, Eaters of the Dead, which was made into the movie The 13th Warrior.
Oh, I love that movie.
So it felt like this was absolutely nothing new. Like I liked the idea of let's throw in what do Vikings fear the most? They fear not being able to go to Valhalla. So the undead to them are an abomination because that means you can't go to Valhalla. I get that aspect and that was kind of cool, but felt like so much of this was lifted or borrowed or inspired by the 13th Warrior.
When did 13th Warrior come out?
So the 13th Warrior was released in 1999, but the book, Eaters of the Dead, was published in 1976.
Oh, I've not read that one, but I like the movie.
Antonio Banderas.
I think my biggest issue is that it feels like the story took a hard left turn once Daddy Viking was just like, oh, let me just see what these sweet dames got to say. Like he was like, we're here to check stuff out. And then they lied to him and he is like, let me go address this liar by cutting off his head. And then he was like, now that I've cut off this dude's head, let's bring me some broads. I need to get my rape on. And then they were like, oh, let's go out into the woods. And he's like, more women to rape? Yeah. All right, let me have some of that. And then the story just took this turn. I thought it was going to be like this romantasy. Where there's this damsel in distress. We're going to save her. And then all of a sudden it became like this. I need to rescue my broad raping dad.
I think a lot of that painting the dad in such a negative light and the other Viking character in a negative light was an effort to distinguish the main character as being different from the rest of the Vikings. Because that's one of the whole parts of the book was on both sides. It was he's not like other Vikings. And the Viking character was like, she's not like other Slav girls. So there was a lot of that teenage rom-com, I'm not like other girls or I'm not like other boys kind of feel to it. Which I guess is fine if we're considering it a young adult book.
Yeah. Well, here's my thing, though. Felt like the character development was not as good as it could have been because to me, like Folkvar's dad, Holmgeir, Jonathan, I know you read the audiobook, so you may be our pronunciation guy. The dad,
I can't say there. I call the main character is Volkswagen. The sister is John Wick. I know who
Okay.
Yaya is. I got Agna. Is Louis a goat?
Oh my God, Lou is my favorite character in the entire book. I love Lou the Ram. He was like, he gave zero craps about anything. Love him.
I'm pretty upset that they didn't like reveal that Lou was like somebody, like an
too.
elder who passed away, and like I was like that. I thought that was cool because they were like, "You got to take him," and then she was like, "How?" And they were talking to him like he was a human being, and then he's like doing all sorts of cool stuff. He's like, he reminds me of like it'd be great to play him, Danny DeVito, like just a little edgy, a little bit of spice. Like I'll headbutt you in the nuts, kind of like get out of my way, but I love my family.
Yeah, Lou was absolutely my favorite character in this book. But my thing with character development, going back to that with Folkvar and with Agna, Agna was saying that Folkvar is not like the other Vikings, right? But Folkvar himself, whenever Agna brought up the bad things that the Vikings did, like, raping and like murderizing this nice guy, according to Agna, he was a nice guy who got beheaded early on, Folkvar is an apologist the entire time. He never is like, oh man, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done that. There was a line in the book where he said something about how he couldn't, I don't have it with me, I should have written down, I'm sorry, that people thought poorly of the Vikings. And I'm like, you think they think poorly of you when you're going around raping and beheading and killing people? Like, what kind of welcome do you want? But Folkvar never changes his view of his people. So he doesn't change. Agna goes from like, these people murdered my parents to, oh, but he's cute in like 3 days.
What did Folkvar sacrifice? She was willing to give up her eternal soul, I guess, and did, to be with the Fae guy forever in exchange for helping to rescue the dad. And what did Folkvar give up? What did he sacrifice for her?
Quick question. Is Volkswagen the main character?
I think there's two main characters. I think he's the main male character, and Agna's the main female character. I think they're equal main characters.
In the audiobook, every other chapter was read from the other's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the book had like a different picture at the top of every other chapter that was supposed to signify that it was every other from their different perspectives.
Yeah, so that made me think who's really in charge here? Who is the main character? Is it Agna or like her Viking boy toy?
Well, she was definitely the stronger character because she sacrificed more. She did more. Folkvar was going around slicing zombies and people up and stuff. She definitely was the stronger character that sacrificed more and did more.
I mean, they didn't paint her as a smart person. They just, she acted out of lust for somebody she just met, somebody new and different that came to town she knew nothing about.
But put that into perspective. We're talking about the 9th century. This individual was a young adult. Was she even adult age? If they said an age, it was young. And I mean like 17 to 19. So 17 to 19, she's only ever known this tiny, tiny village.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like she went off to university.
Right.
I mean, she watched her parents get murked.
Yeah.
Sure, but that didn't teach her wisdom.
They were faking her marriage. There was wisdom built into that, how to care for her younger sister. There definitely wasn't enough character development built into her backstory. You probably don't have to go as deep, but they forced relationships in. Like, what was the whole point of going over to her rich auntie's house? Like, it was like, the only reason I can think of that they went over there was so that they could say the book is somehow related to Kiev. I
thought it was to get the cleric. Wasn't that where the cleric was?
Well, they went there to get help.
I think it was reinforcements.
Yeah,
it was reinforcements.
Yeah, when her aunt wouldn't help her, then she was like, well, I know one other place we could maybe get some help. And that's when she went to the Christian church.
Yeah.
But Auntie's role wasn't pivotal at all. The book survives without Auntie.
Yeah. I do think that the aunt, going back to the aunt, I think that her one role that she had, other than being like parental figure, like basically after their parents died, it was Yaya and the aunt was the only ones that they could, potentially go to for help. The one role that I think that the aunt had in the story was trying to get Agna married off. And I think that helped push the two main characters together. Because then they were like, oh, well, we're not going to let you get married to this random person, so I'm going to marry you. Although I got to say, it pulled me out a little bit. And once again, I'm not a history person, so, I don't know necessarily. But to me, it was like, okay, if you are an unwed young adult woman in that time, I would have thought that the idea of getting married for stability is not this crazy idea. Like the way Agna made it sound was very like modern. Like, yeah, through our eyes, sure, it's crazy to get married to a random person just for stability that you don't know. But through what I would think what would have been socially acceptable and expected in her time, I didn't feel like I understood why this character was so surprised by it or why she expected things to be different for her than for what they were for everybody else.
She was also like the auntie was also the only character that had a complete 180 of their perception. She went from bigoted and hatred to Volkswagen, and at the end she was like, "Oh yeah, I'm so glad you guys are hooking up."
True. I mean, I think ultimately she just wanted Agna to be safe, you know, and in that time for a woman in that world, it would be getting married, you know, for better or for worse. That's what safety and stability was. You know, when it comes to historical fantasy and ye old timey fantasy, we can be okay with fairies existing and Will of the Wisps existing and Baba Yaga existing and Viking undead horde existing and underwater creatures existing. But the idea of a world where women can choose their path is crazy talk. So fantasy overall, I would say this was pretty good on fantasy element. There were plenty of fantasy elements. To me, I gave this 4 swords, if we want to do swords for fantasy. It was a 4-sword fantasy because there was plenty of fantasy elements in this book.
So did we establish we're doing halves or not?
We can. Do you guys have a preference?
Yeah, like I think we have
We're not doing all fractions on this, Jonathan.
Oh dang! I got a lot of fractions.
You've got to do just. It's got to be a whole number or a half.
Okay. I gotcha. All right.
A broadsword and a dagger.
That's exactly what you got. It's a broadsword and a dagger. Oh my god! Originally it was a broadsword, a dagger, and a pocket knife, but so like 1.5 for me. It just wasn't it. It was too much all at once. Trying to drink from a fire hose. Just pick one thing, roll with it, and we can go deeper. And then I can start to emote with the magic or the faith. The other thing for me,
politics, we're going to have to cut that part out, Jonathan.
Who hasn't given their rating?
My opinion is for the fantasy, I'm going to have to say a 3 because it was some interesting elements brought together, but overall I felt it was just too many. And there was just too many cliches that were being used, especially in the fantasy aspect.
Jonathan, what did you end up giving for the fantasy? What was your final rating?
1.5?
1.5.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting it in here.
I'm with Mari. It was a solid 4 for me. There was a lot of fantasy. I enjoyed the fantasy. I don't think the fantasy is always supposed to make sense. 4 for me.
Agreed. All right, moving on from fantasy to romance. The romance aspect. What do you guys think?
Oh man, what romance? There was an undertone of lust. I didn't really pick up on any romance.
Yeah, I think the amount of romance in this story was about the same as the romance that was in Romeo and Juliet. It was 2 horny teenagers, which
it was childish.
For the target audience, if this is being targeted at young adults, that may gel. But we're older adults, so it's like the saying, reading Romeo and Juliet when you're 16 is very different than reading it when you're 50.
So Jonathan and Kelly, would you guys say 1 or do you want to put 0? For romance.
I gotta give it a sword. One. Yeah. Oh, sorry, hearts. One heart.
1 heart. Kelly?
I mean, I think there was some effort to build up romance. I'd have to say a 2. I very dislike the trope of I'm not like other girls or I'm not like the other guys.
Mm-hmm. Ash, what do you think?
I think it's 2. I think there was some effort. I think you have to take into account the time, right? We're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Courting was not really going to be a thing. If you're talking about love, it would have been very fast, right? It didn't speak to my soul. It's solid 2.
Okay. I think for me, it was a 1, and it mainly it felt very much like a Romeo and Juliet story. That was what it is for me, which is not my jam. I have never liked the Romeo and Juliet story. It's very insta-lovey, insta-lusty. Like, it basically would be almost a 0. Romance for me, it's mainly more lust than anything. However, if we're going to define romance as like love of any kind, I will say that I very much appreciated the relationship between Agna and her yaya, Agna and her grandmother. I thought that was a very sweet and caring and supportive relationship.
Mari's right. There was some bromance type elements between Agna and Yaya, but there was definitely no bromance anywhere else. I don't think there was any bromance between the Vikings.
Dad's relationship was very power over. Like, I'm the patriarch of the family. You're going to do what I say, or I'm going to backhand you.
Yeah, and how dare you fall in love with someone that I don't approve of. Yeah, he wanted to control every aspect of folklores.
You got to remember, this is in the time when marriage for love was incredibly uncommon. We're a long way from when marriage for love became more common.
Spice guys?
It was almost non-existent. It really felt like a Hallmark movie to me, where things were like, we're on the precipice of a little bit of spice, but we just couldn't get over the edge. And then there were reflections of it late in the book. So I gave it, hey, what object are we using? Is this like,
I'm going to say peppers.
Chili peppers?
Yeah, chili peppers.
Peppers? All right. I did give it 2 peppers, though.
Yeah, there really wasn't a whole lot of spice in this book, which is fine. I mean, it is targeted to young adults, so the place that any spice could happen was between the 2 main characters, and it did. It happened late, and it was pretty tame.
How many peppers you giving it?
I mean, I would say 2. There wasn't a whole lot of it. A lot of it was the thinking afterwards, like, oh, if she was any other wench, I would have just taken her right there.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, I would have just raped her.
Ash, what you think?
It was a 1. I think it's so cute how the boys think it was a 2. I feel it was a 2. I feel like
sweet summer child.
A little bit more numb. Yeah, it's cute.
There was neck biting. I think that's a 2. That neck biting is a 2. A kiss is a 1. A neck biting is a 2.
I guess I didn't think about, if we were going to give something a 0, but I just assumed a 1 was like there was none at all, where there was so little. At least there was, I guess, I feel like there was some effort to have some spice.
Yeah.
I'm with Kelly. I didn't see 0 as an option. I mean, like, Ashley,
again,
are you putting 0 on the map?
No, but you're so cute. So you guys recognize the level of spice based on, like, quantity or whatever. But when it came to the fantasy, you reversed it. There was too much fantasy, so you gave it a lower rating. Like,
yeah,
interesting.
The math doesn't. Well, the math doesn't math for me.
Math ain't mathin'.
I didn't expect there to be.
For me.
Yeah, I didn't expect there to be lots and lots of spice, because knowing this was a young adult, now I'm a little bit worried that Ashley and Maury may think that what their perception of what is an appropriate amount of spice is a higher threshold.
Well, but again, I don't think we're talking about what's appropriate versus not. I think, again, it's perspective, right? And that's why I compared it to how you both rated the fantasy compared to how Mari and I rated the fantasy. It's based on palette, right? It's based on taste. It's based on what we've experienced, what we know. So let's pause that line of thinking. Mari, what did you rate for the spice?
So for me, I read a little bit of the author's page about her, what she said about herself. I went to her website and read that, and it tainted me a little bit, to be honest. She described her writing in terms of like sexy times as being clean. She said all her books were clean. That's a term she used, which is a terminology that I do not like to refer to when I'm talking about sex positivity or sex writing at all, because it feels like, okay, if no sexy times is clean, then sexy times must be dirty. Which I'm more about sex positivity, so not my jam. So I was expecting it to be super mild, like vanilla. So going in with that expectation, there was more in it than I expected. I thought what was there was fine. It was little snippets were fine for what they were. I think the overarching jarring sentiment for me was the comparison of like the little snippets of description of spice versus the in-depth description of fights and battles and stabbings.
And gore.
Yeah, and it's like,
Yeah.
yay, violence. Violence is great. Violence is wonderful. But sex is dirty.
So what you're saying is this was entirely an American novel where
Yes.
we shame the sex, tone down the sex, can't talk about nudity, but
Let's decapitate people in the first chapter.
Okay.
Yeah, decapitate people in the first chapter and go from there. So I give it a 1 for spice.
At one point,
All right. So ultimately, $1 million question. Do we feel that this is a kissing book? Is this a kissing book? Is this romantasy? Would you label this a romantasy book? I agree. I say no.
Hard no.
Yep.
yeah, I said no.
I feel like it's a no.
I
It's
feel like
iffy.
if it isn't a solid yes, it's a no.
Okay, if it's not a solid yes, it's a no, then no.
Yeah, I think overall probably no. I lean probably heavily into the no. One other thing I wanted to go over was the cover. Like how well we thought that the cover reflected the story of the book. I'll say the cover was done by Erica's Mystical Creations. That's who is given credit for the cover. I know this is a audio media, so I will say it's mainly a black cover with some icy blue icicles hanging off of a metallic looking eagle. And I don't know if it was just the day that I had Hunger Games on the brain, but there's something about it that very much read like Hunger Games to me. I know that an eagle has some significance in Norse mythology, but for me, I felt like there's so much that goes on in this book that the cover didn't really do it justice for like all the directions that this book goes. It's not a bad piece of artwork. I just didn't think it was very reflective of everything that happens in the story. What do you guys think?
Well, there's two covers, though, is the problem. So there's the cover you described with the bird and the moon in the background, right? That's the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
So that was the cover I saw in the Kindle book, but on Goodreads, there's an entirely different cover. The one on Goodreads has like a skull with a woman's hand touching it or holding it maybe. And then you can kind of tell it's a woman by the hand, but also because like in the background behind the title text, there's like a woman's hair and kind of you can see like maybe what like just
like
a bit
necklace?
of her, yeah, like a bit of her like chest or whatever.
I feel
That's
like that
interesting.
one's far better suited than.
I agree.
I didn't see that one. Where's that other one at?
Goodreads?
It actually, yeah, well, I was on Goodreads and I saw the bird as you were describing it, so I had to Google it again. But yeah, so I see what Kelly's talking about. I don't know that either of them are very representative of the story. Maybe the skull and what appears to be younger girl is a bit more inclined, but neither overwhelmingly speak to me.
You know, artistically, I like balance, and I think that the one with the Trans Am logo on it was pretty cool.
The Mockingjay.
Mockingjay, yeah.
Yeah. The Trans Am logo, I like that because the only person we didn't run into in this to get mashed into this book was Smokey and the Bandit.
Yeah, no, I did like that the cover art. I don't think it relates at all. Like I didn't even think I felt like snow. It felt like springtimey in there, so it didn't give like cold vibes. Of the two, I like the fire chicken the best, but I still like if I was just giving like if I was looking at the art and buying a book based on the cover, I'm more attracted to books that have some sort of balance on the front and that have a circular pattern to it. What system are we using? Paintbrushes?
Paintbrushes, yeah, let's do paintbrushes.
I'm gonna give it 4 paintbrushes for overall artistry.
But we were going for the rating was based on how well it portrays what's in the book, right? Not what we actually thought of the art itself as far as the quality of the art.
Half a little skinny paintbrush.
Because for me, it's
like from the dollar store.
Yeah, it's like one brush because neither of them really had anything. Neither of the covers told you anything about what's going on in the book or even hinted at it.
So how many brushes was that, Kelly?
One.
One? And Jonathan?
Taking into consideration the idea that it didn't parallels between the story and the actual cover, but I still like the cover. I'll give it 2.
And Ash, what do you think?
Man, I'm zooming in and I'm really trying to find the connection from the pictures to the book. And I'm not finding it. It's a 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even though I have Goodreads, I just looked at the Amazon version. I didn't look at the Goodreads version. So this is my first time really looking at the Goodreads image. And I'd say one thing, what's interesting is it's under a different name. On Goodreads, it's Vikings in the Mist as the title. But I would say that if I were walking by a library or a bookstore, the Vikings in the Mist cover, the one that's on Goodreads with the skeleton, would pull me in more. And I feel like it definitely gives you more vibes of what's inside the book than the other one. So I would have given the other one 1, but this will raise it, I think. Like this one would be a 3. So the average between the two, I guess, would be a 2 for me.
This is like the gift that keeps on giving, though. Like I was trying to like zoom into the witchy one with the skull, and I found a third one, guys.
What? Where?
I know. I'm gonna send it to you now. Sorry. I'm trying to see what this is. So it's definitely her. It's Eliza Tilton, and there's a couple on the front. And I think this one is actually the most likely for what we just read.
Where did you find
this
one?
doesn't work for me at all.
So I was just Googling. This one looks like
a paperback version.
Paperback
I see
bog, but it's also like Amazon Music. I don't know.
Huh.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Wow.
To do it more for you.
He looks fake. He looks like a Ken doll and a Barbie doll pressed up against each other. It's way more spice when their bumps are touching like that.
That's a 0.
He doesn't have a 4-head. He's got a 5-head.
I don't know. It feels a little bit more Fabio for me.
It's 100% Fabio.
Those Harlequin romance novels at the grocery store. But I think when you're talking about whether or not it represents the book, I think that one's a little bit closer.
If I saw that cover and had to guess what was on the inside of it, I would say it was a vampire and a werewolf, because there is no way I would think that dude is a Viking looking at that cover. I would think that she was some kind of princess.
Because of the crown.
Because she has a crown on.
And a ring, I think.
It's a nice piece of artwork.
Yeah.
But that's like, I think that's even worse than the other 2 covers as far as representing what's in the book.
Other than it pulls in, well, I don't know. I think if it didn't have the crown, it would be better. I like that it pulls in some of the leaves. So it's got a little bit of the allusion to the magical tree. Interesting. I didn't know any of those versions existed.
Did anyone have a favorite part?
A favorite part? I had a favorite character, as I've said. I love Lou, but that's my thing.
Lou.
I end up loving like the side characters of most books. Side characters are usually my favorite characters.
He had the most personality.
Yeah.
So you're saying the most well-developed character was Lou, the ram?
I mean,
I would read him all day.
Yeah. I want to know what he's up to. What's his story? There's more to him.
Where did he go? What? Yaya's gone.
Oh my God. I want a prequel of like young Yaya and Lou, like off on their adventures. That's what I want.
Backstory.
Yes. All right. I think we have talked this book to death, unless anybody wants to add anything else about the book.
Well, we talked briefly about how it was setting up a sequel in the non-spoiler section. So I just want to point out that I feel like the author was really trying hard to set the groundwork for a potential sequel and bringing back Dear Daddy as an undead vampire that he's going to have to go hunt down. Agna talking about how she has to figure out a way to get out of the deal she's made. So there was definitely, I think, some groundwork being made in an attempt to set up a sequel.
I think she got distracted. Eliza needs to complete the story for Lou.
All right, so we're looking forward to having a fun time with you guys, looking into more stories, more books, more adventures to pick apart, and we hope that you come along for the ride. Thank you for listening to Of Swords and Soulmates. Before we go, make sure to check the show notes, rate and review us on your podcast app of choice, and make sure to follow us on Instagram at Of Swords and Soulmates, or join our Facebook page, same name, Of Swords and Soulmates, or look us up on Goodreads, Of Swords and Soulmates, and see what we're reading.